Soldiers of Reddit who have faced child soldiers in combat. What has been your or your comrades' experiences? Any unique challenges you or others have faced? My buddy said that kids would often run up to the convoy trucks in Iraq, and some of the guys would give them candy even though they weren't supposed to. On one such occasion, a kid tossed 2 live grenades into the truck. One of the grenades was quickly tossed away to explode without issue. The other was not as easy to get rid of, and ended up amongst the group of kids. The guys giving out candy were put on cleanup duty. No idea what the approximate age of the children was, and not many other details. It was pretty rare for him to get drunk enough and in a mood to talk about any of it. It's gonna be one of those threads, folks. Buckle up, and if you need to, just don't watch this one. It's all good. Story 2. My platoon sergeant was on his 3rd tour when he joined our unit heading to the sandbox. I'll probably never forget the time he just dropped in casual conversation in a joking manner, "You can take home a lot of things from your time in service, but I'd rather not have been the first guy in my neighborhood with 3 confirmed unalives." And he just kept talking from there like he didn't want to give anyone else a chance to question what he just said. It worked. I never asked. End of our tour, nothing really happened the whole time. He was comfortable enough with us to tell us some stories from his past tours. One of them involved meeting a 13-year-old Iraqi boy awkwardly trying to carry an RPG in the suburbs of Baghdad, and the sergeant just up and running at the kid, screaming at the top of his lungs, firing his weapon as fast as he could in the air, scaring the kid enough for him to drop the RPG and run. I never saw his file to see if he had a bronze or silver star, but I think he earned something that day. Kid was likely just being used as a mule to bring gear and ammo to insurgents. So he likely wasn't a threat himself, but he could have been shot for carrying a weapon by someone too quick on the trigger. Sergeant intervened, but chasing someone through the streets is likely to get you isolated and shot, so he had no idea what happened to the kid. Story 3. My ex was British Royal Marines and fought child soldiers. This was 10 plus years before I met him, but he had horrible nightmares and on a couple of occasions broke down crying while drunk. He never told me everything in a coherent start-to-finish way, but from what I've pieced together, he took down 1 or more child soldiers protecting his unit. It catapulted him into self-loathing. He got awarded a medal for it, but refused to accept it, although he was forced to attend the ceremony with members of the royal family. Only got through it by drinking himself into a stupor and then spent the next 4 to 5 years with a serious drug habit, before being able to transition into a more moderate alcoholism, so... yeah, child soldiers are just one of the cruelest things to employ in war. It is somehow equally cruel to both the children and the people who have to fight them. In a world without morals, sure, you could say it's an excellent tactic, but it's just gross. I don't know of any other way to say it. Story 4. I can't speak for others, and thankfully, I never had to pull the trigger, but I always gave them a lot more time in the crosshairs versus an adult. There were several times they ran up unexpectedly and waved a gun in our direction, or just generally acted like they were going to attack us. I would put them in my sights and beg, "God, please don't make me do this." Thankfully, every time they would stop what they were doing. If it were an adult aiming a weapon at us, they would get zero thought. I remember the ones I didn't pull the trigger on so much more than the ones that I did. I'm sure a lot of soldiers would disagree with me, but I sleep just fine at night. Story 5. I remember manning a guard post when some kid about 16 jumped out of his truck holding a huge knife and started walking towards me. I was like, what the hell is this kid doing? He's got a knife and I'm wearing body armor and carrying an M4. He kept on moving on us and no one I was with seemed to know what to do. So I chambered around and aimed at the kid. He froze. I gestured towards his knife with the barrel of my weapon and the look of realization came to his face as he looked at the blade in his hand. It was like he didn't even realize he was carrying it. By this time, everyone else was aiming at him, so I thought he was going to crap himself. He turned around and ran back to his truck and took off. To this day, I have no idea what was going on. Maybe he was told to make his bones and that was the best he could come up with. Or maybe he wanted to talk to us legit and didn't realize he was holding a knife. I don't know. All I know is I almost unalived him. And if he was old enough to have some facial hair, he would have been dead before he took 2 steps. Story 6. Not me, but a fraternity brother and close friend who passed away told me a story once about his second deployment in the Middle East. He was an Army Ranger, Army Special Ops, and was a breacher / first one in during all the breaches, because he just had balls of steel and insane reflexes. He told me that he unalived a kid once who couldn't have been more than 14 years old. He said the action wasn't what haunted him. He said it was how it happened. He was leading the team through an alleyway to a door that led to a suspected illegal weapons cache, and he held his breaching shotgun up to the door and gave count. And as soon as he was about to breach, the door swung open and a kid leaned out through the door with an AK pointed outward. So he blasted the kid in the face with the breacher's shotgun, and he said the look of surprise on the kid's face was what bothered him most. A mix of surprise and understanding the inevitability of his doom. There's just no running from a shotgun blast to the face. Story 7. I was with the SADF back in Angola. My platoon and I had a few brushes with the MPLA. We mostly met poorly trained militias armed with old Soviet gear. But I remember on one occasion we were entering a village where we were supposed to get water. The village, if we can even call it that, had around 10 to 15 actual houses, and of those at least half were abandoned. I remember that our spotter yelled out to us telling us to get prepared. Our lieutenant saw something that visibly shocked him and called out to our sergeant. We received the order to issue warning shots south of our position. That's when we all saw it. Around 30 to 40 kids with guns bigger than them, with a few adults who seemed to be their COs. Our sergeant ordered us to target the officers, and we did. Even after all 6 of their adults were KIA, the kids still continued to shoot with no control of their fire. After maybe 5 minutes, the order came. Fire at will. I don't remember if the entire platoon opened fire. I just remember I did. In the moment, I didn't quite think about who I was shooting. I don't think anyone did. All we saw was an enemy eager to send us home in body bags. We saw enemy uniforms. Nothing else. Nobody said anything afterwards. My comrades probably all willingly forgot this or justified it by saying something like, it's us or them. It's very easy to analyze the situation if you weren't there, but when you're in the moment, you forget that the ones on the other side are just like you. So to sum it all up, I opened fire without thinking too hard about it. Don't know if I regret it, I just know I don't like remembering. Story 8. I knew a guy who served and we got drunk one night and I was the idiot who asked, "What's the worst thing you saw while serving over there?" He got quiet and got this faraway look in his eyes and then told me this story. I was in an armored convoy and we were in the middle of a patrol, and it had been a pretty normal day. The school buses that were used were pretty much just minivans, so the only way to identify it was a school bus was usually the sticker they placed on the side. Anyway, the area we were in was known for placing copper on top of their bombs, because when a bomb ignites, the copper liquefies and basically goes through anything. Even our tanks can't block that stuff. So we're on patrol, and a bomb goes off about 10 feet to our right, and I figured I was a dead man. Right then, a school bus drove by and provided cover from the blast, so only one of our soldiers was hurt, but not even seriously. However, that school bus was blown to hell. Most of the kids died, but the worst part was the driver of the school bus, who survived. It was a middle-aged woman, but her legs and arms had been blown away from the blast, so we had to drive her to the nearest hospital. I'll never forget her screams, especially because she had to sit under my legs since we had no room. She screamed and screamed, but mostly I won't forget the arms and legs of the children that had been destroyed from the blast. It will haunt me forever. Story 9. Didn't actually pull the trigger on the kid, but was ready to. Convoy through a village, and the kid reaches into a pocket and pulls out what looks like a grenade and tries to throw it. I hesitated. The grenade slipped out of his hand, and it was a rock. I was ready to shoot a kid over a frickin' rock. If it was a grenade and he managed to throw it, my hesitation could have meant my buddies' lives. I'm glad it was a rock. Story 10. If you've never been in combat, it's hard to explain to people how frenetic and chaotic combat can be. You don't get a red pip that highlights where the enemy is, you don't have a radar, you don't get a notification that your shot hit its target. You hear bullets whiz past you, smack into something near you, ground, wall, trees, vehicles, etc., and you get behind cover. You then start yelling to your squad mates about where you collectively think the incoming fire is coming from. Sometimes it's obvious, but usually it's not. You're even more screwed if you're in an urban/semi-urban setting, where there are non-combatant civilians running around. Worse still when you simply can't tell the difference between the two. You're trying not to die. You're trying to leave cover, acquire a target, shoot that target, and then get back behind cover before someone sees you and shoots you. This does not leave a whole lot of time for pondering how old your target is, or what their motivations are, or how long they've been a soldier. Mix this in with a kid who would run around trying to pick up brass in the middle of a firefight, and it's just a hot, chaotic mess. I didn't want to die, so I shot back. Most people who have been in combat will tell you something similar. Story 11. During Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2004, I was on a 4-week operation in northern Iraq on the Syrian border with the 1st Stryker Division. 4 strikers, 4 men each, spaced every 5 miles. Boring as all get out, as we were literally just watching the same paths day in and day out for 4 mind-numbing weeks. Within the first few days, an old woman from the local village would show up with a few kids and some pita bread. They would give us stacks of the bread to eat, and we would give them candy and water. This carried on every day into the 2nd week, until one day it was all different. Instead of the old woman and kids, this day it was a lone little girl, maybe 8 years old. Immediately, the 5 of us on my truck know that this is not okay. You see, we would usually see them coming over a rise in the direction of the nearest village, a mile and a half away. Our trucks had what is called LRASSS on them, Long Range Advanced Scout Surveillance System. Could read numbers off a credit card from a great distance. And when they came over the rise, they were usually running and excited, happy and smiling. This day, the single little girl slowly walked over the rise towards us, sobbing uncontrollably, and carrying a huge stack of the bread. We called it into our platoon sergeant and applied our learned rules of engagement. Initially, we screamed at her on the bullhorn, "Stop or I'll shoot," in Arabic. But she still pressed on. Once we saw she wasn't going to stop and walked within 400 meters of us, we began to take warning shots into the air. Still, she walked toward us. We began to shoot into the dirt 30 meters to her right or left. She soils herself and pukes, still holding the bread, still walking towards us. Now she's 200 meters from us. The whole time we are relaying the situation to our platoon sergeant. He's screaming over the mic to all 5 of us that he's going to be there in 5 minutes, and if the threat isn't neutralized by the time he gets there, he will do it himself. Me and one other soldier had kids, so we agreed we definitely were not shooting a kid, and the other 3 agreed. Everyone just froze up. Between the platoon sergeant screaming over the mic, seeing the girl so obviously distraught, literally soiling herself and throwing up, knowing she's probably going to blow up and one or more of us is going to be with her, and seeing her still trudge forward amidst the screams over the bullhorn and the warning shots ringing out, madness. We all just froze, not wanting to unalive a kid. And just like that, when 100 meters or so away from us, we heard a shot, and then saw the hit against her chest, and she fell flat backwards. Pita bread on her chest. Our platoon sergeant had come up behind us on his truck, and just as he said, if the threat wasn't neutralized by the time he got there, he would do it himself. So he did. We waited for 4 hours for explosives ordnance disposal to come and confirm. The stack of pita bread was hollowed out and 3 fragmentation grenades were inside. Thin wire looped through the pins and around the child's waist, meant to be passed off, pulling the pins and blowing us up. 2 weeks later, when we finished the op, and we were fortunate enough to get a 48-hour downtime, me and my 4 squad mates on the striker that refused to shoot a little girl were mercilessly smoked by the platoon sergeant for 24 of those 48 hours. He ran us into the ground with a fury I've never experienced. He told us you could all be dead, and that little girl would have been the one to do it. She was a little over 4.5 feet tall. She wore a pair of old, faded, neon teal sweatpants and a red Minnie Mouse sweatshirt. Her hair was dark black and she wore it down, wind kicking it everywhere. I can see her face so vividly now as I write this. I can hear my buddies screaming and arguing about what to do. I can smell our grit and grime from being unbathed for 2 weeks. I can still faintly hear her sobs. That was 15 years ago, and I will never forget the ugly nature of man I saw that day. On both sides. On theirs for forcing a child to do such a thing, and on our side for having to unalive one. This is one of the reasons I believe that to get high ranking in the military, you have to be at least some kind of psychopathic. I'm not even saying that as a necessarily bad thing, but you do have to be very detached from the humanity of everything. This is a horrifying story made all the more horrifying because OP wrote it so well. Story 12. I wouldn't say it was unique because every day in itself was always something new, and the child may not have been a soldier. I was the medic riding in the back right seat of a Humvee back in '09. I saw a child about 10 plus or minus 2 years of age from the backseat of his parents' Mercedes, which was at my 3 o'clock. Point to 9mm at my gunner, whose fire sector was to my 9 o'clock. I saw a child about 10 years of age, plus or minus 2, from the backseat of his parents' Mercedes, which was at my 3 o'clock, point a 9mm at my gunner, whose fire sector was to my 9. I immediately open my window and aim my M4, and let the convoy know what I'm seeing. Gunner's turn and a shot came from the Humvee in front of me and hits the car. No one was hurt. The reason I didn't fire is because that I could see he didn't have the instinct to pull the trigger. Had he been several years older and carried himself more like he knew what he was doing, then I'm positive I would have been the one to fire, and it wouldn't have been the car that I hit. Story 13. I was deployed in Afghanistan from 09 to 10, and again in 2012 with the US Army. Due to the nature of my deployments, the first one was much more kinetic, and that's where most of my personal encounters with the enemy happened. A lot of the people we fought were teenagers, probably 16 or 19 years old, so some of them were children by the US definition, but over there people grow up a lot faster. Everyone I dealt with was trying to neutralize me, so I don't feel any remorse about shooting back at them or dropping mortar rounds on them. I never had to deal with younger kids being a threat or anything like that, thankfully. And honestly, myself and everyone I knew generally really liked the little kids over there. They were usually sweet and nice and always asked for candy and gum and stuff. And even when they would throw rocks at our trucks, it was hard to blame them. Not much else to do for fun around there. Story 14. Not really the same thing, but this question reminded me of something I read in Stars and Stripes while I was deployed. Some army unit was doing daily patrols through some crap hole town I can't remember the name of. They did this patrol every day, and the locals got to know them pretty well and didn't seem to mind. And the kids in town would run alongside the convoy and beg for candy. A bunch of soldiers started tossing them stuff from their MREs. It was a hearts and minds type of thing, I guess. Anyway, one day while on this routine patrol, an IED ripped through the convoy while it was stopped, and a bunch of kids were gathered around. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think there were like maybe 4 casualties for soldiers and 20 or more kids. I just know it was a pretty high number, and the first thing I thought was, goddamn, this village just lost like 20% of the kids that live there. I wasn't on this convoy and I don't know anyone who was, but I had been on the same sort of mission dozens of times and could easily place myself there. I saw kids get neutralized by insurgents and allies, but I never saw a mass casualty situation involving little kids like this. Story 15. We were in Kandahar province and always dealt with the usual BS like IED pot shots at us, and the occasional mortar or RPG fire. But one of the things that will always haunt me personally was we were on task that day to do route clearance for the villagers, and for another group of guys going out onto a 3-day mission, when we came under fire from the east of our vehicles. This is a small village, so we could tell where the firing was coming from. So we put on suppressing fire and 40mm their way. After about an hour of constant firing and wondering where the hell the enemy was going to go next, we had some children, I'd say ages 8 to 14, come out into the open, and we immediately had to train on them. Firing from the enemy was still continuing, but it was from our south now. The kids were on our western flank. They came out and shoved this child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, in front of our vehicles, maybe 25 meters out. I and other soldiers had our sights on these kids, but me being 18 years old and never shooting someone before, didn't think that the kid they shoved out had anything menacing about him. So I kept my eye on the older kids. After about 2 minutes or so of the other kids telling him to go away from them, the little boy was bawling, might I add the whole time, and he started to run toward us, not fast, but maybe a jog. And that was when one of the other kids was spotted holding a homemade detonator. Me and the others were screaming contact, but we didn't know where it was going to come from, when luckily for us, I saw the little boy's shirt flutter up as he was running, and the thing that was strapped to his chest we later found out was RDX, or some form of plastic explosive wrapped with hot glue metal. So I took the shot without thinking. The kid hit the ground like a sack of wet flour, and the bomb blew up maybe 10 meters from the Humvee. I'll never forget the look on that terrified little boy's face as I swept his life right out from under him with one squeeze of the finger, all because some POS father or mother strapped their own confused little boy in explosives and then sent him on his way. Alright, that was the last one. I just wanted to come in at the end and say thanks everyone for sticking around. These were some tough stories. I hope you all managed to take something away from it or something, I don't know. Either way, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.